$40 camera versus a $13,000 camera setup. I wanted to test a few cameras in a realistic situation and see at what point people could actually tell the difference.
Yeah, for the nerds out there, we're comparing like an Amazon Scamera against APS-C with a kit lens, full frame with a professional lens, and then medium format with a professional lens.
I like how you said Scamera, like that's just a known term.
In the community, we know these things.
Okay. So we're going to be showing A/B pictures. We tested them on total amateurs, not photographers at all, just like the everyday person. And also, I put it on my Instagram and asked you all if you could tell the difference. So I'm going to give away those results, but we're going to go through the cameras, how we tested it, and what the results were. And I was actually very shocked by what the results were.
Yeah, me too. It made me question my whole life choices. Yeah.
But first, I want to thank our sponsor, Squarespace. If you need your own website or a portfolio, store, gallery, or a place to book appointments, you can do all of it at Squarespace. Go to squarespace.com/Chelsea and use the coupon code Chelsea to get 10% off. Thanks, Squarespace. The point of this test is that we always recommend cameras to people, and I was wondering, how much camera do people actually need? At what point will people notice the difference compared to their smartphone? They need to spend a whole bunch of money to get better results. I chose 5 cameras.
Yeah,
to
and
test
including the modern iPhone.
The first camera that I chose is this $40 camera. Tony calls it a scamera. Is that a real term? I thought you made it up.
No, other people have definitely used it. And if you look at the reviews, like people buy this and then they hate it. It's also a popular gift. Like this is a favorite among mother-in-laws to get their son-in-law who's like into photography, or nanas get their grandkid who wants to start a vlog or something, and they think they're helping.
It's actually difficult to convey how cheaply made this is.
It's got the red ring, which I think signifies a Canon professional lens.
Yeah, you can, yeah. It says it has 16 megapixels, and you will laugh when you see the pictures for that. But yeah, it kind of like has like the form factor of a real camera, but not really much else. Then we went with the Canon R100. I wanted to pick something you could get at a big box store at $600, which I think is a super common price point that like a very entry-level photographer wants. It's APS-C, which means it's a smaller sensor than full frame, but bigger than your phone. 24 megapixels, 4K video, a lot of features like eye autofocus. So they're packing a lot into that $600. The next one is an iPhone. I used my iPhone 14 Pro.
Yeah, same main sensor as the iPhone 15 Pro.
And you use your 15 modern, for some. Yeah, it's like 12 megapixels, but they boast 48 megapixels, but it's like, we'll see if that's actually true. And then for a professional camera, I chose the R5 Mark II, the Canon. And that's like a $5,400 camera.
With the lens, yeah.
With a lens. It's a full frame sensor and 45 megapixels. So this is a coveted pro camera body. And then like the creme de la creme, the Hasselblad CFV and 100C, $13,000 with the lens, the body, the viewfinder, the grip, 100 megapixels, and a huge medium format sensor.
I'm just gonna hold this because I just love to feel it.
Yeah.
We're not quantifying that, but.
What I wanted to do was just put them all on equal footing with like an easy mode test. So I took a continuous light into the studio and like no flash, because like this $40 camera doesn't have a hot shoe. Like I didn't want to worry about it with the iPhone. I just wanted them all to have consistent lighting. I sat Tony down for a portrait. He's the most still person east of the Mississippi. And
me versus the mannequin, it's me.
Yeah, it's you. You win.
Yeah.
The mannequin like might shake on the ground. You self-stabilize. So I wanted this like good even lighting, a good still portrait shoot, and then I took them into editing software because I thought, here's what's realistic. People are going to edit even pictures from their phone, and then where they're most likely going to show them off is social media. So I shared them on social media like you do to see if with all this practicality, if you can tell the difference. Now, before we get into the results, again, I want to plug our sponsor, Squarespace, because if you care about pictures at all and you're not posting them on social media and you do want to show off the high resolution of your camera, you should have your very own website, somewhere professional where you can control how your final photos look, how they're displayed on a clean background without any ads from competitors or anything like that.
Yeah, and you can sell your prints there too. If you need to deliver pictures to clients, you do that a lot. It's nice. It makes you look more professional than just social media for sure.
Right, let's say you have more than a $40 camera and you want to sell big prints, then that would be the place to do it. And I've sold some of my prints there. It's really easy to do. You can try it out for free, and it's not one of those things where you set it up and then you forget to cancel and you keep paying. Like, it automatically cancels after the 14-day free trial, so just try it and see if you like it. I think that you will, and when you do, use the coupon code Chelsea to get 10% off, and that saves you 10%, but it also lets Squarespace know that you heard about it from me, and this podcast should keep going, and my zany tests that are kind of crazy. So Tony, I want to get into the results here.
This scammer picture is the worst thing I've ever seen, but it does have a time date stamp. That's catchy.
Do you think that there's any possibility that that's 16 megapixels? Like, in what universe is that 16 megapixels? That looks like my Razr flip phone from like 2003.
They actually sell the same camera with like 48 megapixels, and it's just upscaling it.
Does it look exactly the same?
The way these cameras are built, they take a webcam sensor. So it's probably like 2 megapixels. And then they scale it up so that they can advertise high specs.
I would guess it was like 2 megapixels.
Yeah.
If you notice, it's just, there's no dynamic range. So the highlights, which aren't really bright, are blown out, even on Tony's face. There's no controls, there's no autofocus or anything.
Well, there's no focus.
There's no focus
at
all.
It's like a GoPro. It's just fixed focus at a particular distance.
But also the back screen is so horrible that you can't tell if it's in focus when you're taking the picture. So I guessed, I don't think being in focus, if this is out of focus, would have made any difference. I really can't tell. Everything looks out of focus. I'm going to say for $40, this ain't it.
No, save yourself $40. Draw a sketch, use an old crappy phone if you have to. Anything would be better.
And Etch-a-Sketch is better than this.
Yeah.
I'm going to give a spoiler on the results of the poll on Instagram. Everyone knew this wasn't it, and every amateur photographer knew this was not the stuff.
Mm-hmm. So the $40 camera is out, but let's talk about the $600 R100 from Canon.
Yeah. Now, I want to say, I thought that $600, of course it's a pretty big jump. I thought about going less expensive, but...
well, that's the cheapest camera that you can buy.
Like in the store,
yeah,
pretty much. I was blown away by the results of this camera.
Yeah.
First of all, the autofocus was fantastic. I was just like pleasantly surprised. And it has eye autofocus, so when I was doing these portraits, not only could I see a good back of the screen, but it was also drawing a box around Tony's eye, so you have those features when we're talking about the usability. As far as the results go, I thought that the results looked very good.
It was totally a passable portrait camera.
Yeah.
And I'm not totally shocked by this because when you go to a wedding, I've seen so many wedding photographers using a basic Canon APS-C kit camera, and the clients are happy with the results. If you go to a lot of photo studios or Disneyland when they're walking around and taking your picture, those people almost always just have entry-level APS-C cameras, and people are happy with the results.
Yeah, and I could see why. You have the capability to change the lens if you want higher resolution, if you want it to look better, if you want a different focal length. But all in all, I think someone could use this camera on a professional portrait shoot if you're doing like family shoots or headshots, and your clients are going to be happy.
Yeah, and it's in the studio, so there's no background that really needs to be blurred out, things that a higher end lens might get you. Caveats.
I also wanted to explain that these pictures that I'm showing, they're before and after editing. So I didn't do some huge amount of editing, but I did just clean things up the way someone might in an editing app. And this is the iPhone.
Which I thought did a really solid job. I think the modern iPhones are really good. I actually think the thing they do worst is portraits. I hate the way the iPhone renders like skin tones and stuff. Mm-hmm. But for most everything else, they're really solid.
I put the iPhone up against the $15,000 Hasselblad, and not everyone in our audience, most people in our audience like the Hasselblad better. 30% of the people liked the iPhone picture better.
That's really shocking. A third of people didn't just think they were indistinguishable. They thought the iPhone picture looked better.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's because we're so accustomed to seeing iPhone pictures. Maybe a real camera looks a little bit foreign?
I don't know. Also, I asked some young people we know, under 25, 3 people, what they like better. I texted a group text with the Hasselblad picture and with the iPhone picture, and they thought 2 out of 3 liked the Hasselblad picture better. But then they started flip-flopping. They're like, wait, maybe this one's the more expensive camera. Maybe I like this one better. So one thing that was interesting about that is that they thought that the Hasselblad might be the iPhone picture because of the
shallow depth.
Yeah, shallow depth of field, like
with
the blurring.
a portrait and a professional camera.
Yeah.
The tip of the nose, the ears will be a little bit blurred, and that's a good thing in a portrait because you don't necessarily want to see more pores than necessary, but it still gets the eyes sharp. But yeah, our daughter's was only familiar with shallow depth of field because of portrait mode on an iPhone. So when she saw that, she thought that was a signature of an iPhone picture.
I know, that blew my mind. I was
full
like,
circle.
oh my gosh, that's
like
crazy.
Apple invented background blur.
Can I say though that people still prefer the R100, the real camera, over the iPhone? And as a professional, when I look at it, I think that the iPhone, it flattens everything too much in multiple ways. Like, it's correcting too much for dynamic range, so it's like squashing all of the highlights and bringing up a lot of the shadows. It creates a really flat effect. The R100 is a little more wide angle, so it's a little more poppy, but everything is more dynamic and real and there's more depth. And I feel like even the people that didn't have a trained eye had a visceral response to that there was something more real looking about it. So it was interesting that even when somebody wasn't totally trained, they're kind of like, yeah.
It's something you feel.
There's something that feels kind of different. This is the Canon R5 Mark II.
It's what, $6,500 for the lens, I think you said?
Yeah, or $5,500. It looks better. When I had all of these pictures side by side in Lightroom on my huge monitor, the difference was drastic. There was just so much more detail on the nicer cameras, but once I exported them and put them on my phone, it was more of just like a very subtle feel and difference because you're not zooming in on the eyelashes and stuff. If you're doing a large print, if you're showing it off on your Squarespace website, if you have a portfolio where people are looking at it in a larger format, yes. If you're sharing it and people are looking at a thumbnail that's 3 inches by 3 inches on their phone, I don't think so, man.
16 years ago when we started this together, everything was either being viewed on like a 30-inch monitor, or you were making prints. But the world has changed drastically, and now almost every picture is viewed on this tiny little screen.
Right.
And usually scrolled past quickly.
But if you have a client, you're still making prints. If I do headshots for people, they still make prints or they still put them on a website. So I think like a pro is still going to appreciate some amount of paying more for a nicer camera. But that R100 is probably still enough.
I think it's totally enough for most people, especially in the modern era. Can I just say a word about detail and depth of field? Like depth of field is the effect that blurs the tip of your nose and the ears. Only the thing you focused on is going to be sharp. And if you compare the R5 to the R100, the R5 is twice as many megapixels, but that doesn't matter for most of a portrait because most of a portrait is a little bit out of focus. The only place you'll really see it is on the eyes where you locked focus.
Right.
So you can zoom into the eyes and see more eyelashes. You can see the veins in the eyes on the R5 Mark II.
Just like you want.
Right. You don't even necessarily want that extra detail in portraits. Unless you're making a massive print for like the Gap wall or something if you're a fashion photographer.
Oh, so when people looked at the R100 versus the R5 Mark II, 66% of people preferred the R5 Mark II.
Yeah, I mean, that's more than 50%, but it's still shocking to me that a third of people liked the cheaper camera better.
When I look at it in a smaller format, you can see that there's still a little less dynamic range with the R100. I actually think the difference might have been your expression, which is something like I couldn't really account for, but if you're being scientific, you could nitpick me and say like, oh, the expression's different or he's making a different face. But the overall lesson that I find is that actually posing someone and having good subject matter and good composition and good lighting is going to get you a lot farther in a lot of cases. So let's move on to our most expensive camera. This is the Hasselblad, unedited and edited. People could tell the difference between the Hasselblad and the iPhone. 64% of people on Instagram preferred it, even when the pictures were very small. So it's not even the detail necessarily that they're appreciating. If you look at the difference between the photos, it's like the dynamic range again, you can see the highlights in Tony's skin without them being blown out. The background gradient is way smoother than the other photos, which is something that I've noticed. So there might be all these little things that it like adds up on a subconscious level. And I'll also say that with the medium format, we can't even pinpoint what it is, but if you're looking at it, there's something where you feel like you could reach in and touch the person. There's like more depth to the photo in a very real, tangible way.
That we can't explain.
No, other than it just looks like the person is right there. They have a 3D kind of effect to them, and I don't know why that would be. I have no idea what that is. It's very strange.
I had a long conversation with a famous YouTuber Manny Ortiz about this, and he recently switched to Hasselblad, and he shoots like almost all portraits. And he said the same thing. He pinpointed it a little bit though. He said the medium format sensor here is able to capture just more gradients, more information. So it has more bit depth, and thus the like little gradations in each individual pore is just a little bit smoother. So things are just a little bit more realistic.
Yeah, somehow it's more detailed but smoother. And you would think that it would be like bumpier if you were seeing more pores, but it's not. There's just something lifelike about it. It's truly beautiful. I wish I could tell you otherwise so you didn't want $13,000 in camera gear, but they're the most beautiful portraits I've ever seen. You just want to reach out and touch them.
And yet a third of people still preferred a cheaper camera on Instagram.
I will say, yeah, there are people who preferred it, but if you're just appreciating your own craft and you don't give a darn about that money, then you'd probably appreciate it. All right, this is where the test kind of falls apart because we didn't want to walk away just telling you like, it doesn't matter, because clearly it does. And where this starts to fall apart is where you take it out of the perfect little world I created for these portraits. And we literally took it into our basement, into a low light setting, and took low light photos, because it's not just about how a camera performs in an ideal situation, because you have low light, you have movement, you have tracking, and that's where some of these cameras are going to win and some of them will never get a picture. This takes so long to take a picture, this $40 scamera, that like everyone could leave by the time the picture is taken. That's how slow it is. So all that stuff matters. So when we go through and we look at it, the scamera in low light looks like a camera obscura or something.
It looks like the picture's taken with the first digital camera or something.
Yeah, Steve Sasson and Kodak in 1970 or whatever. It looks bad. You don't want it. The R100, you can see things. There's a lot of noise.
Yeah.
But I think it still looks pretty good. Definitely way better than the Scamera. I think that if you're getting dinner with friends, this would be okay. You're just not going to have a ton of detail. You're not going to be able to bring up the exposure and have it look nice.
And to get technical for a bit, all the noise you see here isn't totally the fault of the camera itself, but really more the lens, because the kit lens that comes with it is very slow. It just doesn't gather much light. So the camera's doing its best with very little light, and that's why everything is so noisy. But if you were to buy a faster prime lens, you would get better results. But then you're spending more money.
So this is where putting stress on the cameras gets interesting, because where the R100 I think was doing better than the iPhone in portraits before, in low light, the iPhone's doing better because it has like the computational capabilities. And so the iPhone was one of the best at taking pictures in low light.
My opinion was that the iPhone's out of camera results looked better than anything else. It does a pretty amazing thing where it will take like a dozen different pictures at different shutter speeds. And the really fast pictures at short shutter speeds it uses to expose the highlights, like the candle that's burning there or the arcade banner that you see on the game machine. And thus, those are rendered really much like your eye would see them.
Yeah.
And then it takes longer and longer exposures and stacks those together to reduce the amount of noise. And it produced a clean, sharp image with absolutely no effort.
The R5 Mark II did pretty well. It did better than the R100, and then the medium format Hasselblad I thought looked the best after processing because it looked more natural than the iPhone, which I think again kind of like, I think it over processes things and I like when things look a little more natural. This is one instance where things started to fall apart and the order of the camera started to go awry, but if we suddenly took this and did action shots, it's going to stir things up again. The amazing Hasselblad is not going to do as well as the Canon 5D Mark II. My point in this is not...
R5 Mark II.
What did I say?
5D Mark
I
II.
keep saying that.
Yeah.
I think I'm like reverting back to the early 2000s
Yeah.
mentally. That happens. Anyway, my point being that when you bring things down to a small format, megapixels might not matter. It's going to be your lighting, your styling, your mood, your composition, and those things that matter more. And if you're a person that's shooting wildlife, then all of that goes out the window because you need something that's very good at like tracking, and you need good autofocus and good frames per second. So I feel like it's good for people to know they can still take great pictures with an inexpensive camera. But it's better for them to know that there's no best camera. Every camera is just a tool, and you have to find the one that works for you.
And I want to encourage everybody to consider how powerful a tool their phone is, especially in low light situations. Like if you're going out to dinner with friends and it's a dark restaurant, your iPhone is going to produce really good images. And it's good to know that you have that in your pocket, the computational photography. You don't necessarily have to bring anything better. Or if you have an R100, an inexpensive camera, your iPhone's probably going to outperform it. So those times, you grab your iPhone and use your R100 for different things.
I don't think you have to tell anyone that. I hardly ever see anyone at dinner with a camera.
Yeah.
I still like to bring like my little Fuji sometimes because even though the photos are less perfect, I like a little personality in my pictures.
Yeah, there are lots of reasons to use a traditional camera, but it's also good to know that there's this misconception that low light performance is directly tied to sensor size. It doesn't really apply when you factor in the computational photography of a smartphone.
So let me just sum up the results. Could people tell from social media when I put the Hasselblad versus the iPhone, 64% like the Hasselblad better. When I put the R100 versus the R5 Mark II, 34% like the R100 better. Most like the, I almost said 5D again, R5 Mark II better. And when I put the Scamera versus the Canon R5, only 7% of people like the Scamera better, and I think they were messing with me. I don't think that that was true.
What was your sample size for these things?
Fewer people responded as the stories went on Instagram, but the first one had like 2,500 total respondents, so it's a pretty good sample size.
That's a huge sample size.
It's not like 5 people, like it was
Yeah.
quite a few people. Oh, the last one was the iPhone versus the Canon R5, and people preferred the R5. I actually think they nailed it every single time, most people. So the trained eye would know, but when it came to our text chain of like our niece, our daughter, and Isaac, they were kind of unsure. They were kind of just going on vibes. They could kind of tell.
And you're asking people to compare two pictures, which is a different scenario than people just seeing a picture that stands alone and deciding how happy they are with it. I think most people would have been happy with anything other than the Scamera. Scamera's a real piece of crap.
Scamera. That's the real hook here. Do not get the Scamera. What do y'all think? Would you like to see us try this with other cameras without the Scamera being involved? Do you want us to push the Scamera to its limits, which is really anything? I think we already have.
Every picture pushes it past.
You know what? Just sitting on the table is the limit for the Scamera because overnight it stopped keeping track of the days.
I noticed the timestamp reset.
I don't know what
Didn't change
happened
the batteries.
to
It just forgot what time it was.
It doesn't know what's happening. It doesn't even know it's a Scamera.
I like that the lens cap says camera. Not a brand name, just camera.
Oh, yeah, the lens cap says camera, but then the lens says video lens.
Oh, that's good.
So that's good to know. Sometimes you gotta know. All right, thanks so much for watching. If there's anything else you want us to test, let us know. Please subscribe to the Picture This Photography podcast anywhere podcasts are available, or just subscribe to our channel. I know a lot of you watch and you don't subscribe, but it does matter. It does help us. And thank you, Squarespace, for making this podcast possible and for making beautiful websites possible too. If you want to try your very own, go to squarespace.com/Chelsea and use the coupon code Chelsea to get 10% off. Thanks and see you next time.
Bye.